The primer smell had settled into the bones of the house and lately into the bones of my patients. I was on a ladder in the living room feathering joint compound along a seam that never wanted to disappear when Lena stepped in like a verdict. Dust swirled around her ankle boots. She had that careful expression she wore after binge-watching self-help reels, gentle practice, slightly theatrical, like she was about to deliver bad news wrapped in a spa brochure. "Adrian," she said, palms open as if presenting honesty itself, "I need something restorative." My putty knife paused. "Another coat?" I asked. "My spirit feels overfull," she went on undeterred. "Kai thinks I'm carrying stagnant energy. He booked a healing retreat for the weekend. Just us, a cabin in the pines, no phones, breathwork, realignment." She offered a soft smile that wasn't meant for me so much as for the idea of herself getting better. "I want to be the best version of me, for us." Kai, her best friend since a festival I didn't attend, called himself a wellness strategist. Near as I could tell, the strategy involved bracelets that clacked when he gestured, and an unwavering gift for advising other people while living rent-free in his parents' back room. On his feed, the world was one long sunrise. In person, he made every sentence sound like a guided meditation that never ended. "A cabin," I said, smoothing the seam, "just the two of you." "For the work," Lena said. "We'll be back Sunday night." The house creaked as if it had an opinion. I had bought this place 3 years before I met her, a sun-tired mid-century with crooked charm. For 6 months straight, every weekend, I'd taken it apart and put it back together, wiring in the attic, plumbing runs in the crawl space, new subfloor in the kitchen, 1,000 tiny decisions nobody would ever notice except me. The renovation ledger in my office told the truth in clean numbers. My hands told it in scars. Lena studied me like she was braced for thunder. Maybe she expected bargaining or a lecture or a fight where I said something unforgivable and she could be publicly brave about it later. I wiped my tool on a rag and climbed down deliberate. "Have a good weekend," I said. Silence widened and then broke surprise relief, a flutter of triumph behind her eyes. She kissed my cheek, a polite punctuation mark. "Thank you for understanding," she murmured, already halfway to the door. "You'll see. This is going to help everything." I followed her to the porch. The late afternoon light turned the plywood patch on the railing a tender gold. Kai rolled up in a hatchback that rattled like a tambourine. A sticker on the bumper urged strangers to radiate kindness. He hopped out with a grin that belonged on a brochure for a retreat called Surrender to Tuesday, and lifted her suitcase as if performing generosity for an invisible camera. "See you Sunday," Lena called. "The way people call to pets they trust will never run." I watched them turn the corner and vanish into a street bright with jacaranda blossoms and brake dust. It wasn't anger that settled in me. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity, hard and clean, like snapping a chalk line across subfloor. This is where the cut goes. Something in me, the part that had kept smoothing over seams that didn't want to be smooth, finally set the knife down. Inside the house was an orchestra of unfinished blue tape flags on door casings, a coil of copper waiting for its final bend, a marble island wrapped in brown paper to protect it from the world. We had stood here 2 months ago with paint swatches fanned out like playing cards, and argued affectionately about whites that were all secretly gray. On the fridge, her vision board held a clipped photo of a Provincetown kitchen with open shelving and a caption about living gently. Beneath it, my pencil outline on the drywall marked where the floating shelves would go. I rinsed my hands and let the water run until it cleared from plaster to skin. The mirror over the utility sink showed a man older than the man who signed for this place, tired in the way that comes from repeating the phrase, "almost there." Too many weekends in a row. I dried off and walked the main floor slowly, the way you walk a job site at dusk, checking nothing in particular and seeing everything. In the bedroom, a sample board leaned against the wall. 2 stains, both wrong in different ways. In the hallway, the new return vent whispered steady air. In the office, sunlight found the ledger and turned a column of costs into a vertical slash of pale gold. I flipped it open with a contractor's reflex. Numbers speak without adjectives, materials, labor, permits. A starred note about lead time on the custom doors. Beneath that, another list I had written for myself in a different mood when to stop. I sat. The leather chair complained softly. The computer woke. On the desktop lived a folder named Exit, an old contingency plan I had made back when contingencies seemed theoretical. I opened it. Contacts. Draft emails. A spreadsheet with 3 columns, speed, certainty, risk. Graham Patel's name was right where I'd left it. He ran an investment group that preferred speed and certainty to romance. We'd done 3 deals over the years. He never asked why. I never explained. The work got done and the checks cleared, which is the only conversation that matters in my industry. My phone lay on the blotter beside a carpenter's pencil sharpened with a utility knife. I picked it up and set it down again. Habit made me look for reasons not to do the obvious thing. I stood cross to the living room and peeled the brown paper off a corner of the island. The marble flashed veined light. Lena had chosen it after 27 samples and a 3-hour debate with a designer who spoke about stone like a therapist talks about childhood. We had at the time laughed about it in the car. That memory slid through me light as a postcard from a city I no longer lived in. I put the paper back and pressed along the edge until it held. Back in the office, I scrolled through notes from our general supplier delivery windows, a discount I'd fought for a photograph of the front door the day it arrived, swaddled in cardboard, like a patient. On the bookshelf, a box of tile spacers, a new blade in its plastic, a stack of permits clipped together with an oversized binder clip meant to suggest control. Everything in order. Everything almost done. Everything waiting. I thought about time, not the poetic kind. The hours you can't invoice, the trips to the store for one forgotten fitting, the extra passes on a seam, because you believed in a line no one else would see. I thought about Sunday nights when Lena declared the coming week would be our reset, and how the reset always demanded that I be less myself. I thought about Kai's voice, round and soft and unbearably certain, telling her the universe rewards those who open their palms. My palm, I noticed, had calluses where a palm line should be. There's a crisp sound a decision makes inside your chest when it lands. It arrived now, simple as a levels bubble finding center. I didn't need different paint, I needed a different plan. I sat. I brought up Graham's contact card. I stared at the number the way you stare down a clean cut before you push the saw through. Outside, a delivery truck sighed and moved on. The house listened. I picked up the phone. I pressed call. Graham answered on the second ring, the way men do when their calendar and their conscience are equally clear. Adrian, he said, all ballast and efficiency. To what do I owe the pleasure? I'm moving on from the hillside place, I said. As is. Cash. Speed matters more than pride. A short inhale, the sound of math. You serious or testing the water? Serious enough to drown in it? Condition, he asked. 80% to this finish line. Electrical signed off. Plumbing rough and finish in. New subfloor in the kitchen. Primary bath tiled but not grouted. Drywall 95%. Trim stacked, not installed. Stone on site. Appliances still crated. Roof recoated last month. He grunted the way investors grunt when a story lines up with prior intel. I've watched your permits roll through. I know the bones. You want certainty, I want velocity. That usually means I pay to be the sprinter. I pictured his whiteboard with the color-coded lines for risk tolerance. Understood. 15 off what you'd get if you staged it and waited for couples in hats to argue about sconce placement, he said. No contingencies. I'll waive inspection. We'll do a quick walk for form. 10-day close if title's clean. I wire in 48 hours after escrow opens. He was describing a haircut most people hate, and builders quietly prefer when they're done pretending a project is a love story. Send the paper, I said. I'll have my doc churn an agreement in an hour, he said. You good for a secure sign? Always. Graham paused, then let the human slip through the banker. Everything all right? Everything's exact, I said, which is better than all right. We hung up. I typed out a single-line email. Proceed on the terms discussed. The reply dinged before I lifted my hands from the keyboard. DocuSign link, escrow instructions, the title officer's name, a PDF of the wire template that looked as those things always do, like a ransom note imagining itself as elegance. I read every line with the professional numbness that keeps you from narrating your own life while you live it. Purchase price check. Close of escrow in 10 calendar days check. No repairs, no credits, no walkthrough drama check. The paragraph where lawyers confess the universe might explode between now and next Thursday check. I signed. The software drew my name in polite loops I have never used in ink. A copy flew to my inbox to grams to a cloud somewhere busily backing up my ability to be done. Numbers don't care about your reasons. They care about your decimals. I had traded a potential 15% for certainty and sleep. It felt like selling a beautiful jacket you never wore because the shoulders were cut for a different body. The house waited. The house always waits. I shut the laptop and went for boxes. There's an aisle in every big box hardware store where the air smells faintly of cardboard dust and new tape, the aisle where people formalize leaving. I loaded a cart with the largest double-walled movers they had, plus tape in a dispenser that promised ergonomic bliss, plus a fat marker that announced its ink could write on eternity. The cashier asked if I needed twine. "I need resolve," I said. And she smiled the sympathetic smile of someone who hears 100 private catastrophes a week and rings them up at a discount. Back home, I set an assembly line in the living room. Boxes, flattened boxes, raised bottoms taped into certainty lids like open mouths waiting to be fed. I started in the closet Lena had colonized, as if colonizing were therapy. Dresses with an ongoing quarrel about hemlines. Shoes with soles that had never met pavement. A row of handbags that looked like well-fed pets. Above them, clear bins filled with bracelets that had the tactical clatter of miniature armor. I folded carefully. I wrapped what asked to be wrapped. I packed the smallest, most fragile last self-help books with watercolor covers and titles that whispered a glass dish for a smudge stick. The smudge stick itself still faintly perfuming the air with the smell of beliefs you can buy in a starter kit. I wrote in block letters across the first lid, "Lena's Things." Writing her name on corrugated fiberboard produced a steadying click. This was not rage. This was inventory. Kitchen next mugs with slogans about mornings. A pour-over cone so pristine it might have been a prop. A set of linen napkins we never used because the idea of linen had sufficed. I kept my tools, the salt 4 plates, and a pan that had earned the right to live within reach. The rest went into the growing regiment of boxes. Bedroom drawers, sleep masks in wealthy neutrals. A silk scrunchie that had learned to look expensive by association. A journal with exactly 3 entries. Ambitious announcements to the future that ended when the future refused to applaud. I didn't read them. Boundaries are a decision and a habit. In the office, I opened the small drawer on the right and found the tiny museum of a year. A theater stub, a ribbon from a charity gala, where we both smiled on cue, a key fob from a hotel in Palm Springs, shaped like irony. I set them aside and emptied the shelf where the essential oils had tiled themselves in cheerful cylinders. Lemon, lavender, courage, a blend whose ingredient list read like polite gossip. Room by room, the house surrendered the story she had tried to narrate onto my life. I moved the boxes into the living room and stacked them 4 across 5 high the way a bricklayer stacks when he cares more about the wall than the applause. 20 in all, a polite pyramid of done. I stood back and felt nothing like triumph. Relief isn't loud. It's the absence of a noise you forgot had been running in the background for months. The emailed ping of Escrow open arrived mid-afternoon. The title officer introduced herself in corporate warmth and attached an estimated net sheet that behaved as if humans were tidy columns. I initialed the things that demanded initials and ignored the sections meant to frighten the uninitiated. The only line that mattered read, "Close of escrow 10 days." I printed the fully executed agreement because paper has a gravity electrons don't. The printer did its solemn work. I slipped the contract into a manila envelope and wrote in my own actual hand, this time, Adrian Hillside Sale. Then, as the kind of courtesy people later mistake for cruelty, I wrote a second note on a single sheet, Lena. By the time you read this, escrow will be open on the house. It closes in 10 days. Your belongings are boxed and labeled here in the living room. Please arrange to remove them by noon the day after you return. After that, a crew will clear the property for the purchaser. A. No threats, no sermon, clarity with a schedule. I placed the envelope and the note at the exact center of the marble island she had labored to choose, and pressed them flat as if neatness were a spell. The sun shifted and threw a bright rectangle across the paper. The stone glowed faintly, the kind of light you only see on surfaces that believe they're in a magazine. I went to the junk drawer, every house has one, even an almost finished house, and took out my old phone, the one too slow to be useful and too useful to throw away. I charged it, cleared the notifications, and set it on the bookshelf in the living room facing the front door at a modest angle. I opened the camera hit record and slid it into airplane mode so it would do exactly one job. Insurance, not entertainment. I didn't plan to watch it. I'm a builder. I like documentation. Upstairs, I packed a single bag, 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, work boots, the book I'd been pretending to read, a dopp kit. On my way back down, I paused in the doorway of each room the way you pause before locking a job site for the weekend. It wasn't ceremony, it was checklist. Windows latched, valves closed, lights off. The small religion of responsible departure. At the front door, I hesitated. The surface felt different under my palm, as if the grain had memorized us and was already unlearning. I locked the deadbolt and turned the knob to confirm the fact of it. Outside, the evening had dragged the streetlights on by their collars. Somewhere a sprinkler sputtered awake. The jacaranda had dropped a fresh purple mess across the sidewalk. The petals stuck to the concrete like faint bruises. I drove downtown to a hotel that promised quiet in its name and delivered it in its hallways. The clerk did not ask what brought me in because good clerks never do. He handed me a key card with an abstract wave on it and told me without irony to enjoy my stay. The elevator carried me up through the building's throat. My room smelled like housekeeping's idea of lemon. The bed looked like a decision waiting to be made. I put the bag in the closet and sat on the edge of the mattress and let the quiet arrive. With nothing to scrape or measure, my hands were awkward for a moment, then still. I ordered dinner steak because a day should contain at least one unambiguous thing, and ate it at the little desk while the city made its soft machinery sounds outside the window. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pick up the book. I didn't look at my phone except to send Graham a single line. Signed, "Thanks for the speed." He answered with a thumbs up that looked more like a seal than an emoji. Sleep came like a switch being flipped, not a song being sung. 8 hours, maybe 9. The kind of sleep where you wake and the room is exactly where you left it and your heart isn't already sprinting. In the morning, I made coffee from the tray, and it tasted like every hotel coffee, and therefore like permission to be imprecise for once. I showered, dressed, and checked the email to find Escrow humming along without my help. The title officer had sent a cheery note about preliminary report delivery. The lender's absence simplified everything. Cash is just a story that moves faster. I glanced at the weather-bright, uncommitted sky, and at the time, Saturday easing into itself. If Lena had texted, I didn't know. I had turned off notifications the night before and found to my surprise that the world had survived. Back at the site of my life, a marble island held an envelope. A bookshelf held a phone. A precise pyramid of boxes waited like an exhibit labeled departure. There was nothing left to adjust. Part of me wanted to drive back and do one last sweep to check the angle of the envelope or the spacing of the boxes as if the geometry could make the message kinder. I didn't. You can iron a shirt until it shines and still not change the fact that it doesn't fit the person you keep handing it to. I walked the river because the river doesn't care who you are and therefore lets you be someone. I watched a runner stop to tie his shoe and a couple argue quietly over whether geese count as aggressive wildlife. I thought about thresholds, the literal ones you level with a laser, and the other kind less measurable, more merciful. Crossing either is the same motion in your body. By early afternoon, Escrow confirmed receipt of the deposit. A digital notice slid onto the screen with the breezy drama of something fated funds received. On Monday, there would be verifications and a preliminary title report with the usual list of ancient easements and the city's favorite lien for a sidewalk repair in 1987. On Thursday, probably a notary would appear with papers and a stamped seal and a pen that wanted to be important. 10 days after the week began, a wire would blink numbers from one column to another, and the house would belong to people who preferred speed and certainty to romance, which is to say, my people this time. As the afternoon leaned toward evening, I felt the edges of the next part of the story lift, like the corner of a page turned by a breeze. Tomorrow night, a car door would slam in a driveway. Keys would scratch at a lock. Footsteps would enter a living room and falter. The camera would record the most honest thing in months, silence arriving in someone who doesn't recognize it. I finished the coffee, tossed the cup, and let the river keep its counsel. There would be more to do, always more. But for the moment, the only thing required of me was to let the cut I'd made stay clean. The house would deliver the message. The paper would carry the weight my voice no longer needed to lift. And the weekend would do what weekends do when you stop asking them to fix your life. It would pass, and then it would end. And then Monday would begin exactly on time. I didn't go back on Sunday. I let the city carry me through the hours, the way a belt carries lumber, steady, unremarkable, more useful than interesting. I ate dinner at the hotel, watched the river turn from steel to ink, and set my phone face down on the nightstand, like a tool I didn't need for once. The first vibration came a little after 8, then another, then a staircase of them, each hurrying up the back of my skull, each ignored. I had left the old phone on the bookshelf, recording angled toward the entryway, documentation, not theater. I told myself I wouldn't check the live view. I didn't. But it turns out you can feel noise even when you refuse to hear it. At 8:41 p.m., an unknown number called 3 times in a row, which is how amateurs try to create urgency. On the 4th, I answered and put it on speaker, watching my own flat reflection in the dark window. Adrian, a man, breathed, already exasperated by the kind of problem he would normally soothe with a scented stick. "It's Kai." I let silence be my side of the conversation. "So he said we just got to the house and there's a situation." "There's an envelope," I said, "and a note." "Neither is a situation. He lowered his voice as if humility were contagious. "She's spiraling. You could have told us. Wow, this is such a hard frequency." "Tomorrow at noon," I said. "That's the only frequency that matters." He made a small wounded sound, the kind a performance coach makes when a client confesses to liking carbs. "Will you at least help us find a mover? I don't have the kind of—" "You have 2 hands," I said. "They'll do." He rallied. "It's not kind to put someone in a scarcity state, man. That's not how partnership ended Friday," I said, and thumbed the call into a square of light that vanished. The phone resumed its imitation of a trapped bee. I took a shower. By the time I came back, there were 6 missed calls from Lena and 2 voicemails. I didn't listen. There are things you can't unhear. I had made enough permanent choices for one day. I closed the curtains and lay on top of the covers until sleep came clean and unsentimental, like a door shutting properly. Morning found my inbox orderly. Title had opened escrow. The deposit was confirmed. The preliminary report would come by noon. Graham shot me a terse all green. My attorney Mara replied to my Sunday night forward with the kind of yes that sounds like a gavel. Title in your name alone. Engagement, not a marital regime. You're fine. She added a sentence I suspected she copied and pasted 10 times a month. Don't respond emotionally to any provocation. Let paper do the talking. Lena's father called at 9:06 a.m. His voice had the lacquer of a courtroom veteran who confuses volume with argument. "Adrian, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding." He began deploying the word, the way people deploy we when they mean you. "It isn't," I said. "You cannot dispose of a shared asset without—" "It was never shared," I said, polite enough to be a blade. "I bought it before I met your daughter. It's mortgaged in my name. The deed says what deeds say. You two were planning a marriage. We were planning a meal too," I said. "The ingredients do not constitute dinner." He exhaled the way men exhale when their playbook loses page 1. "Look at minimum. Lena is entitled to reimbursement for the value she added to the property. If she can locate that value on an invoice, she's welcome to send it to my attorney," I said. "Meanwhile, she has until 12 to remove her belongings. After that, a crew will prep for turnover." "You're inviting litigation," he said. "I'm inviting conclusion," I said, and read him Mara's number. He didn't slam the phone down. Lawyers have learned to make their anger cordless. The line simply went quiet, then dead. I stood in the hotel room for a minute, watching the low white ceiling glow with morning, and thought about how many arguments I'd avoided by mislabeling them discussions. At 10:15, I walked to a coffee shop that kept its pastries behind glass like jewelry. The barista spelled my name with missionary zeal on a paper cup and handed me something hot that tasted like competence. I sat by the window long enough to watch a man parallel park beautifully and raise his hands in private applause. When I checked my email again, Mara had responded to the father's first salvo. "Please see attached deed. Please see attached ledger. Please see contractual timeline. Also note, client's courtesy deadline for removal is noon today. Failure to retrieve remaining personal effects authorizes disposal." She had CC'd the title officer not because it was necessary, but because documents behave better when they know they're being watched. At 11:02, curiosity won an argument with pride. I drove by the hillside place on the long way to nowhere, slow enough to be unnoticed and quick enough to be unmemorable. A rental box truck idled in front, its ramp down like a reluctant tongue. Kai shuffled down the steps with a carton held too far from his body. He looked like a man trying to carry an idea that had finally taken on weight. On the strip of lawn, Lena directed traffic, urgent, imprecise, more foreman than friend. Even across the street, I could feel her road-burned fury. I didn't stop. Some scenes are self-explanatory. I turned right at the next corner and watched the jacaranda stain the asphalt violet in my mirror until the road curved and took the color with it. By 1 o'clock, Mara sent a short update. Opposing counsel has no position beyond volume. Deadline passed. Proceed. I called a crew I'd used for estate cleanouts and bank-owned foreclosures, quiet men with protective blankets and a respect for other people's mess. Keys behind the gas meter, I said. Everything in the living room is boxed and labeled. If there's anything left in the closets, bag it. Inventory photos, then haul. By 3, the foreman texted me 32 pictures with timestamps and a line item for disposal. He'd found 2 coats in the hall closet and a tray of bracelets under the bed. They documented both like evidence because that's how we stay friends with liability. I forwarded the invoice to Mara with a 1-line note, add to costs. That afternoon, while the house I had disassembled became empty in a new way, Lena began a broadcast. A friend sent me a screenshot Lena washed in front-facing camera bravery, writing a caption about choosing wellness and being punished for prioritizing mental health. The photo was artfully messy, a suitcase on a rug, a sweater spilling out a half-unpacked life. Hundreds of hearts pulsed beneath it like a school of fish, mistaking a hook for food. I didn't respond. I ate a sandwich that tasted like refrigerator and went back to the river. The geese had organized themselves into a small government. A boy tried to feed them a cracker and reconsidered when they advanced democratically. By evening, mutual friends had begun to comment under Lena's post with inquiries that were either polite or surgical, depending on whether they bought things from her links. Didn't Adrian buy the house before you, one asked? Is this about the guy from the retreat? Another wrote the way people ask about a neighbor's basement flooding from behind their own dry hedges. I didn't need to lift a finger. The algorithm would perform the autopsy. Before bed, I posted one image to my private account. The living room, the pyramid of boxes, the labels stark and patient. Caption made space, breathing better. No names, no tags, just a surface and a sentence. In the morning, everything had shifted a few inches. The sympathy under Lena's post had thinned to questions. The questions had attracted answers. Screenshots of the envelope began to circulate because people take pictures of paper the way tourists take pictures of sunsets, as proof they were near something ending. I muted my notifications and made eggs. At 11, a messenger arrived at my office with a packet from Lena's father's firm. It strained its own clips with ambition. Demand for equitable distribution. The cover letter said, as if capital letters persuade. They wanted half the proceeds, the remainder of a year's lease on a vehicle Lena liked to film herself, exiting 3 months of therapy and unspecified damages for emotional distress occasioned by abrupt eviction. I scanned, then slid the packet across to Mara when she arrived at noon in a blazer the color of a good redaction. She read faster than I do and laughed twice short and bright. It's gall, she said, and it's amateur gall. What's our gall, I asked. Short, she said, and documented. Her reply dispatched by 3 was a syllabus in miniature, the deed with my name. The ledger with materials and payments in columns so neat a nun could grade them. The escrow timeline. The letter that established the noon deadline. The inventory from the cleanout. And the law which sometimes wears a smile when it finds an uncomplicated fact. She added 1 page more, an invoice to the father's firm for the cost of disposal, plus the locksmith who would meet me that evening to rekey the place per the buyer's request. Let him call a judge, she said, snapping her folio shut. Judges like paper more than feelings. The rest of the week behaved itself. Title sent a preliminary report that listed easements like distant cousins, nothing surprising. The buyer's walker strode through for form and grunted contentedly at the trim stacks and crated appliances. Graham texted all smooth and a small gif of a train arriving exactly on time. I signed what the notary put in front of me while she narrated each page like bedtime for adults. On Friday, the wire landed with the softest chime a bank can make. I stared at the number for a minute, the way you stare at an empty room you once knew by heart. There was briefly the temptation to forward the confirmation to Lena's father with a single cheerful emoji. I didn't. We were done talking. News travels through social circles like electricity through a grid, fast, invisible, indiscriminate. By the second weekend, people I barely knew were suddenly certain they had always predicted this. Someone DM'd me a thread where Kai, smelling of digital incense, posted a video about releasing outcomes filmed in a bedroom, whose poster and low ceiling told a different story. Lena switched strategies midweek, sorrow instead of fury, reflection instead of accusation. A paragraph about learning hard lessons that named none. The engagement dropped. The comments migrated to newer angers with fresher hashtags. 2 Saturdays later, the moving truck the buyer had hired stood where the old one had. The house no longer mine accepted new voices. I walked the block and didn't cross the street. A dog barked at me as if I were a threat to whatever future it had been promised. I raised a hand in apology and kept going. The jacaranda had finally relented. The pavement showed itself again ordinary and unadorned. And then the Kai and Lena experiment collapsed not with a bang, but with logistics. According to 3 different friends who each claim not to gossip. Lena had tried to live in the spare room at his parents' place, a room with a bed too soft for reality, and a dresser that smelled like childhood. She expected a life that costs money. He expected a life that applauds. They argued about groceries and gas and whether a vision board is a plan. His mother imposed a curfew on the noise. His father asked about rent once, and never again, because the answer was a sermon. 3 weeks in the spiritual strategist retreated from the retreat. The phrase, "you should probably go back to your parents for a bit," is the same in every dialect. Mara forwarded one last letter from the other side, a thin thing that said without the courage to say it that they were letting the matter rest. Without prejudice, they added as if they might wake one morning with fresh appetite. We filed it under closed and went back to work. By then, I had already spent my time on something that wasn't a quarrel. I purchased a grim little strip of commercial property with good visibility and bad bones and began the kind of renovation that pays you for noticing every inch. It felt less like moving on and more like moving correctly. In the quiet moments late or early or while waiting for an inspector with a flexible sense of noon, I thought about the old house not as a loss, but as a sketch I had erased before the paper tore. I thought about Lena without rancor and about myself without apology. Somewhere inside those thoughts, a door had already opened onto the next room. A month slid by with the soft efficiency of an unremarkable success. Escrow closed checks, reconciled permits, pulled subs, scheduled beams, set. My phone remembered how to be a tool instead of a siren. On a Tuesday, the old phone in my desk drawer buzzed alive because I had forgotten to turn it off. I tapped the screen and without meaning to watched a minute from the night in question, the front door opening, the envelope catching the light, the kind of silence that makes people look smaller. I closed it gently. Documentation had done its job. I didn't need a rerun. If there was a moral, I didn't write it down. Some stories are less about what you learn and more about what you stop pretending not to know. By the time the leaves began to mean autumn again, the commercial build had a frame. The HVAC lines snaked obediently where they should, and the space started to sound like possibility. I walked through at dusk and listened to the building breathe. Work has a music. You just have to stand still long enough to hear it. There would be a final chapter to tell, though I couldn't see its face yet. I only felt the shape of public room and a private recognition, something quiet and inevitable as a stamp. For now, I signed for a delivery of conduit, answered a text from Graham about another parcel he thought might suit me, and locked up as the sky turned that particular evening blue that makes everything look briefly finished. Tomorrow, the sheetrock would go up. Next week, the inspector would bring his clipboard and his reluctance. Sooner than that, somewhere else in the city, someone would be trying to manifest an outcome without building the studs to hold it. I wished them luck the way you wish weather luck. I put the keys in my pocket. The door shut, the way a good door shuts, true, calm, final, without being unkind. And the next part waited just ahead, exactly where it should. 6 months is enough time for steel to go up, for habits to go down, and for a story to dry into its final shape. The commercial build on Sycamore had walls, now real ones, not just studs singing in the draft. Conduit ran like clean handwriting across the joists. The front facade waited for glass. Business was good in the ordinary way that feels like Grace clients who paid on schedule subs, who answered the phone deliveries that arrived when a calendar said they should. On a Wednesday, the fire marshal signed off on the suppression lines with a grunt that counted as praise. Next stop, my super said, tapping the rolled plans planning counter for the exterior signage and the cafe build-out. I nodded. Paper, then people, then progress. That's the order that works. City planning lives in a building designed by someone who thought fluorescent lights are immoral. You take a number from a red dispenser that sighs when it feeds you. You sit in a room where time is measured in the rate at which strangers' coffee cools. A flat television reminds you to be courteous. A poster declares that your tax dollars are hard at work, and you believe it because the chairs are soft in exactly the wrong places. I filled out the last page of the application packet with the patient block letters of a contractor who has learned that legibility saves weeks. Legal description, parcel number, scope, occupancy, load, trash. Enclosure details, ADA path of travel. I clipped everything together with a binder clip that could hold a small book and took a number C124. They called C119. Then C121, skipping a number as if to prove time is an unreliable narrator. When C124 blinked on the screen, I stood and followed the thin carpet path to a plexiglass window framed by plastic plants. She looked up at me before I looked at her. Recognition is fast. It arrives whole. Lena wore a city polo the color of resignation and a lanyard heavy with keys that opened nothing important. Her hair was pulled back the way you pull a thought back when it threatens to run. The makeup that used to announce a platform now announced hours under ceiling grids. For a beat, every noise in the room stepped back. "Good morning," I said, because it was. Her mouth opened then, undecided. The effort to manufacture a different past flickered and failed. I set the packet in the tray. "Application for tenant improvement at 2219 Sycamore," I said. "Exterior signage cafe, build-out occupancy load 48. Plans are stamped by a licensed architect. Structural calcs included." I brought the digital set too. I slid the flash drive under the small door at the base of the plexiglass. She took the packet and flipped the clip with that practiced city clerk motion that says, "I control the paper. The paper controls the outcome." Her hands were steady except for the part of them that wasn't. She scanned the top sheet like it had wronged her, personally, found nothing to hate, and began stamping the receipt pages with a rhythm that was almost music. "How long is planning review running?" I asked like any other applicant in a room of applicants. 6 to 8 weeks, she said a little too quickly, as if speed could keep the words from being about us. "Depending on traffic and comments from fire." "Understood," I said. "We've scheduled framing inspection for next Tuesday. Mechanical and electrical rough the week after. I'm trying to sequence so we're not stepping on our own feet." The corner of her mouth tugged. Not a smile, not a smile. "You always were. Efficient," she said, as if the adjective were a wound and a compliment in the same breath. The printer behind her coughed up a receipt with the weariness of a marathoner at mile 20. She tore it off, stamped it with the cube of authority, and slid it back to me along with a yellow ticket that meant I had paid the city to look at my life. Her eyes finally climbed back to mine and stayed. Across the plexiglass, we were two people separated by a decade's worth of choices compressed into 6 months. If there was anything to say, it didn't belong to the present tense. "Lena," I said, just her name, not a summons. I pulled a small folder from my bag and removed a check made out to the City of Brookside permit fees too. I signed it on the counter with a pen that had the city's logo and the ability to write through even a pause. "There's a note in the system," she said, motioning to her screen. "Planner wants to see your ADA turn radii around the service counter." Work, merciful and exact, had returned to the conversation. "They're in sheet A7, I said. 60-inch clear, no obstructions." She clicked, frowned, clicked again. "Found it." "Yes," she said to herself, then, louder. "Yes." We stood there in the ordinary after that. She stamped the last page with more force than it required. I gathered the packet, slid the receipt into the folder, and zipped it closed. Courtesy is a kind of armor. I put mine on, and it fit. "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate the help." She swallowed, nodded. The lanyard keys knocked together softly, a chime for small thresholds. "You'll get an email when the file's assigned," she said. "If we need anything else, the planner will comment in the portal." There may have been 1,000 lines we could have spoken and regretted. We didn't. Behind me, a man asked the next window whether a deck counts as a structure. A child in a dinosaur shirt announced to the room that dinosaurs were not in fact extinct. The television reminded us again to be courteous. I stepped aside to let the next number move forward. On the sidewalk, the air smelled like rain that wasn't sure yet. Across the street, a food truck sold tacos to a line of people who trusted that small good things are possible in the middle of a weekday. I stood under a sycamore that had grown as unromantically as anything alive and checked my email. Intake complete, case number PL231472, assigned planner Salgado. The machinery had accepted my request and begun to digest it. I walked back to the truck and ordered 2 tacos and a water. A city inspector I knew from other jobs waved with the weary cheer of public servants who spend their days being told about other people's mistakes. "You filed Sycamore?" he asked. "Just now." "Good bones," he said. "Bad alley." "I've seen worse," I said and meant it. That night, I closed up at the site as the street took on that blue that makes scaffolding look briefly beautiful. On the way to my truck, I passed the new storefront glass waiting in crates, the stickers still clinging to their edges like declarations. The door-to-be leaned against a wall, raw and ready. I rested a hand on the blank where a handle would be and felt the building breathe back a draft, a promise, a future shaped like a room you could invite people into. Revenge has a theatrical reputation it rarely deserves. The version I believe in has no monologue, no trumpet. It looks like a permit number, a signed check, a door that shuts true, a morning that starts without dread. It sounds like the stamp of a city date on the corner of a page and the quiet you keep when there are 100 louder options. I set the alarm, locked the gate, and let the sycamores draw their dark lace across the streetlights. Somewhere in a building with fluorescent murals, a stack of my papers sat cooling under a stamp. Somewhere else, a woman in a city polo would hang up her lanyard and turn off a lamp and walk out into an evening that didn't know her name. The rest was simple. Wait for the email answer, the comments build the room. The next day would arrive exactly on time, the way good days do. And when the door finally opened to the public and the space filled with voices, I would stand back as if I hadn't been the one who drew the lines and set the studs. I'd let the place do its job. That was enough. That was all. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.